is there some view that you have about whether or not this was Iran? It wouldn't be out of the realm of reason. They've already attacked tankers. They seized them in the Persian Gulf.
I mean, I think this is just a culmination of what we've been seeing since May. And when we've had 6 tankers attacked, in the Straits of Hormuz, we've had tankers seized. We've had Saudi's East-West pipeline, the main diversionary pipeline that they use to get crude away from the Straits of Hormuz. That was hit in May. And what is interesting about that May attack on the East-West pipeline is there has been increasing speculation that the drones did not take off from Yemen in that case, but they took off from Iraq. And so what everyone is closely watching today is whether there's going to be a finding at the drones and missiles left from Iran or more potentially from Iraq. There are many Shiite militias in Iraq that are backed by the Revolutionary Guard. We've had Israeli strikes on these militia sites in Iraq. So that is the real issue that everyone is looking at. What was the involvement of militias in Iraq? The Iraqi prime minister was out yesterday saying Iraq was not the launch pad for these attacks, but that's where speculation lies. And again, if there is a finding that this was the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard's Quds Force, or elements associated with them, I think we're very much moving towards a military confrontation.
So Brian, I mean, this is interesting right now, right?
Yeah, it is, certainly. And I want to ask Helima a question. Hi, Helima from Houston.
Hi.
I mean, you've got the bankers for the Aramco IPO meeting over the weekend in Abu Dhabi as this occurred. In your mind, in your big brain, is there any hint that this timing was not accidental, that this was not maybe only an attack designed to damage confidence in Saudi oil, but designed to attack confidence in the Aramco IPO?
I mean, you think about someone like Qasem Soleimani. He's the head of the Revolutionary Guard's Quds Force. He's been described as the Kaiser Soze of the Middle East. I mean, for him, timing is everything. I think you also want to ask the question of what about the timing with the exit of John Bolton and the discussions about a potential deal between the United States and Iran that would bring back oil. The fact that this occurred just days after that could be a powerful signal from the Revolutionary Guard that they will dictate the terms with the White House in terms of the off-ramp. And so I think the questions that are going to be asked is really what comes next. Was the IRGC looking for a better deal? Were they looking to potentially take this to the brink of military conflict? I mean, this was a really audacious move. I mean, this is the largest single-day interruption of oil supply. This is the nerve center of the Saudi Arabian energy system, Abqaiq. Al-Qaeda tried to hit Abqaiq in 2006 and failed with 2 truck bombs. The fact that a group was successful over the weekend is terrifying.
All right, so Eamon, let's bring you back into this conversation here, because as we talk about the idea that this could have wide-ranging policy responses, not just from the U.S., but elsewhere around the world, as we take a look at the developments here, this is also happening right after Ambassador John Bolton, who was one of the biggest, perhaps, war hawks in the Trump administration, has now stepped down, been fired, relieved of duty, however you want to say it. Does this kind of perhaps put a little bit more emphasis on the idea that there are geopolitical risks that need to be addressed, and perhaps ones that could flare up like what we saw in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, absolutely, Dom. I mean, it comes at a time when John Bolton is being removed from his position as National Security Advisor, and there's some question about who the permanent National Security Advisor is going to be. So the Trump administration's foreign policy apparatus is in something of a flux here at this point. The question is whether the Trump administration is now more accurately seen as more dovish without Bolton than it was with Bolton. But you remember back in June, the president came pretty close to authorizing a military strike on Iranian targets after some of those attacks that we saw in the Persian Gulf were attributed to Iran as well. The president calling off that strike with just a few minutes to spare, according to all the reporting that we got on that one. So the president deciding ultimately he didn't want to have a large body count on the Iranian side. He felt that would be disproportionate. We'll see whether that sort of restraint prevails here, given the mix of foreign policy advisors around the president has changed significantly. It's a little bit difficult to predict exactly where he's going to land here. And of course, this is a much more significant attack that we've seen in Saudi Arabia that might force the administration's hand here. And the president certainly signaling in his tweets that he's willing to contemplate some military action.
Brian, over to you here.
Yeah. I want to ask Helima this, because we're obviously in Houston, Helima, and there's been a lot of concerns about the heavily indebted, heavily shorted U.S. oil names. I know you're not an equity analyst per se, but does this make U.S. oil more attractive?
Well, I mean, I think what's really interesting is that we had seen, before the trade war, ramping up of U.S. exports into China. And so you brought up the whole trade war dimension of it. I mean, this would be a time where those exports are potentially really needed from a whole host of consuming nations. I think the real question is going to be who steps up and fills the void with China. I mean, you have Russia has also surged their exports to China because, again, China's lost a lot of Iranian barrels. That's why these countries have ramped up exports. China has had to slash their Iranian imports. So now China's going to be looking for who you purchase your oil from. And the U.S. had been trying to gain market share in China pre-trade war. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic to watch.